Hello! So today what we're going to do is make pumpkins. So these little guys I used to make years ago and sell them at craft shows, and I'm not making them anymore, so I found a bunch of parts and pieces and thought it might be a fun thing to do a video about. So what you're going to need, I'm going to put this over here, is you're going to need some fabric, and it doesn't take very much fabric. Here's, just a small piece that's, well, here, let me give you some measurements because I know everybody's going to want to know the measurements, but these are pumpkins, so they are organic objects. You don't need to make them perfect, so they don't need to be any particular size or shape or anything like that. So this one is about 15 inches by about, 7.5-ish, 7.5, 8 inches, something like that. This size piece of fabric will make a pumpkin that's about this size. And I say about because it depends on how much you stuff it and how you make it and a whole bunch of other variables. So what we're going to end up doing is folding this in half. So if you have two pieces, you can do it that way, or if it's one long piece, it really doesn't matter. Here's another piece that will make a larger size pumpkin. So we're not going to do that. We're going to do the smaller one today because it's easier and faster. So you'll need your fabric for the body of the pumpkin, so that's that part. Then you're going to need a scrap of fabric for the stem. And again, it doesn't really matter what size or shape the piece is. This one is about 5 inches by about 3 inches approximately, and we're going to end up folding this one in half this way. Again, it doesn't matter if you have two small pieces, use those. So fabric. You will also need some yarn. This is just kind of a brown yarn, and that's what gets wrapped around to shape the pumpkin. You'll need some stuffing. You will need scissors, thread, and needles. And the one thing that really helps are these big ginormous upholstery needles. So these usually come in a set, and there's an 8-inch needle is the smallest one, and then a 12-inch one is the longest one. So the needle that you're going to need has to be as big as the at least bigger than the size of the pumpkin, because otherwise you're going to have a hard time getting the needle through. If you try and do this with a small needle, it is not going to work. So you will need some sort of, like a doll needle will probably work if you have the smaller size pumpkins. Otherwise, go get the upholstery needles. They sell them at the fabric stores in the upholstery department. Okay, so let's get started. Let's move that out of the way. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our piece of fabric. We're going to, if you have two pieces, lay them on top of each other, right sides together. Otherwise, just fold it over. And we are going to start shaping this piece of fabric. So we need to shape it so it's kind of curved. We're going to do sort of a roundish sort of curve here. Let me show you what step we're doing right now. Here's one that I've already completed to this step that we're about to do. So what we need is a hole in the top. This is where you're going to stuff it through, and it's where the stem is going to go into. At the bottom, it needs to be completely closed so the stuffing doesn't fall out. Okay, so like I said before, we're going to do kind of a curve. So we want to start, if this is going to be the top of the pumpkin and this is going to be the bottom of the pumpkin, we need to start over here and curve in, and then curve in further at the bottom because we want the bottom closed and the top open. So I will show you what we're going to do. So we're going to get on our sewing machine here. And I just have the black thread. It really doesn't matter because you're not going to see the thread. Okay, so make sure you do some back stitching so your stitching doesn't come out. Okay, and trim and cut off your thread tails. Okay, so there is our first line of stitching, and that may be a little bit hard to see, but it starts right here and it goes there and then it ends over here. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. So we're going to turn it over and do exactly the same thing. thread just broke. All right, one more time. We started up here, we got to about the middle, so let's start in the middle. I think it's time for the sewing machine to go into the repair shop. It's getting a little bit tight. I don't know why. All right, so let's get rid of our thread tails. Okay, now we've got these two sides done. So the next thing is we need to do 2 more seams exactly like this, but we need to do it on the opposite sides over here. So what we're going to do, and this is probably the hardest part of this whole process, is we're going to pull it apart from the middle and line up these 2 seams. Okay, so that's kind of what it's going to look like right there, and we're going to do the same thing at the bottom. So let's pull that in, and you don't need to do any pinning or anything like that, because this is just it's a pumpkin. It doesn't need to be perfect. Okay, so let's stitch this one. And make sure those kind of line up. There we go. And on the bottom, I am going to stitch all the way so that I overlap the previous stitching on those 2 seams I've already done. Okay. Get rid of the thread tails. Okay, so there's one. I'm going to turn it over and do the 4th one. So I've got those lined up. I've got these lined up. There we go. Make sure there's enough of an opening here, so that's about big enough for a stem. Okay. All right, so that is the 4th seam for the body of the pumpkin. So you can see I've got an opening at the top and it's completely closed at the bottom. So now we can turn this right sides out like that. And there's no hole at the bottom, it's all closed. And there's a nice hole at the top for the stem and for stuffing. Okay, so now we need to make the stem. So that's this part here. So I've got lots of different fabrics here. Here's one that's already done. We don't want that. So I could use the brown, I could use this one, I could use this piece. Yeah, I kind of like this piece for this fabric. So let's use this one. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to take this piece, fold it in half, and we want to do, here's this one here. You can see I've kind of got a slight angle. You could do an angle and a curve, an angle and straight, however you like your stem to look. So I'm going to do kind of a slight angle and maybe a curve. I don't know. We'll see what it looks like, see what it feels like when I get to the sewing. Okay, back stitch and a curve. Okay. One other thing I wanted to point out, when I turned this the pumpkin body right sides out, I did not trim any of the seam allowances. All the seam allowances are still in there. It doesn't matter; they can stay there. Same with the stem. Actually, if you use an angle on the stem, it is a good idea to cut that off, because otherwise it doesn't turn properly. So I'm going to get rid of some of that fabric there. Okay, you can turn the stem right sides out. And I forgot my point turner. Usually I'll use a skewer or some other device, but I don't have one sitting here, so I'm just going to use my scissors. That works fine. Okay, so next step is we are going to stuff. Let's get this out of the way. So I'm going to go ahead and stuff the stem first. So for these pumpkins, they're fairly solid, not super solid, but I can still squish it. So if you do it too loosely, it's not going to retain its shape, so you do need to stuff it somewhat tightly. And again, it just depends on how you like it. It's up to you. And it's a pumpkin, it's not going to have to be perfect. I know I'm repeating myself, but okay, let's see. Get my scissors, kind of shove that in. That looks good. Okay, there's our stem. Okay, now let's do the body of the pumpkin. And at this stage we don't need the sewing machine anymore, so I'm just going to go ahead and turn that off. Okay. So now it's just a matter of getting all the stuffing in and kind of working it in. Stuff. It usually takes more than you think it's going to need. But it's very forgiving if you don't get it in there just exactly right. Ooh, and look at that. We made a mistake. We have a hole. I didn't notice that. I think that was from when the sewing machine decided to break the thread for me. Alright, so looks like we have to unstuff and turn it right side out again. And where did that hole go? Okay, where is it? There it is. Huh, that's very strange. Okay, well, good to know. Let's do this again. Okay, so let's make sure that that hole is completely closed. Now I lost where it was. There it is. Okay, good. Let's turn it back again. Okay, right side's out, and here we go again. So let's get the stuffing in there. Okay. All right. Okay. So when I get about this much in there, I'll just take my skewer or chopsticks or scissors or something not too sharp and just kind of work the stuffing in to the bottom. Okay, and then keep going. Kind of sounds like I'm ripping at my seams here. Okay. Alright, so now it gets a little harder because you have to kind of work the stuffing in to where you want it. So I'm just kind of using my thumb and pushing down. So I've got more on this side than I do on this side, so I'm going to add a bunch right here. And I think we're probably going to use all the stuffing that I have left. One more tiny piece left. Put it right there. Okay, so I've kind of shoved it down and in so there's like a bit of a hole in the middle. You don't have to do this. This is just the way this one ended up. That's where the stem is going to go, and it's going to end up pushing down and in. So it is time to put the stem on. Now we are going to attach the stem to the pumpkin. So the easiest way to do it is with one of these. This is a curved needle, and it's much easier to get down and in where we're going. Usually I use a smaller one, but I can't find it. If you have a regular needle, that's fine too. It's just slightly easier to do with a curved needle. I also use a heavier thread. So I've got I think this is a hand quilting thread, and it really doesn't matter what color it is because it's not going to show by the time you get done. So we need a nice long piece here. Okay, get that out of the way. Put a knot in the end. Okay, so I'm going to take a stitch and my knot just came out, so I'm going to do that again, and I'm going to take another stitch and make a knot through the fabric because that will make this a lot more secure. Okay, good. That's not going to come out. All right, so now all we're going to do is just a simple ladder stitch. So I'm going to just take a little stitch here, pull it through, take a little stitch over here, and pull it through, and then just keep going all the way around. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It's not going to show. So just keep taking little stitches. And you'll notice I'm not pulling these stitches tight yet. I start to do that after I've got 3 or 4 of them in there. Okay, otherwise what happens is that. So I'm going to push it back. Take a stitch. Take another one. And we're just going to keep going all the way around the pumpkin. And it really doesn't matter how big of a stitch you take. You can do big ones, little ones. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's not going to show. All right, now I'm going to start pulling my thread tight. So I'm trying to work the pumpkin body fabric down so it doesn't pop out on the sides. See how that's, see, it's not showing at all. Okay, so let's keep going. Okay, I'm going to pull it tight again so I can get these. There we go. So we're getting close to the end. Oops, and I just lost my thread out of the needle. So put that back in. Looks like we need one more more stitch, and we're back at the beginning. All right, so pull that all in tight. See how that looks? And then we're going to take a stitch, wrap the thread around it to make a knot. And pull it tight. And that's in there. Then I'm just going to tuck the thread tail in, just take a big stitch, pull that through, and chop that off. Okay, so we are done putting the stem on. Next thing is we're going to shape the pumpkin with the yarn. So the way to figure out how much of this yarn you need is you take your yarn and you wrap it around the pumpkin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and one more just to have enough to work with. So that's 6. You want to, there's a lot of extra, but it's just easier if you have all that extra, because I'll show you why. All right, so now I need my ginormous needle. I'm going to use the 8-inch one. And let's see if I can get this thing threaded. Try it this way. Luckily the eyes on these needles are fairly large, so it's relatively easy to thread them. All right, let's find our end and let's make a knot. I do a figure 8 knot on the end just to make a bigger knot. So instead of doing like a square knot or a granny knot, I go under and then over like a figure 8 and then through the loop, and it makes a bigger knot. Okay, so starting at the bottom, okay, so here's the bottom center. We're going to go about 1/2 inch away, and we are going to start on one of the seams just next to it. We're going to take a stitch, and it's a little harder to get this needle through because it's so big. See that? Okay, so that went through. Pull it tight, and then we're going to take one more stitch and loop the yarn around to make a knot. All right, there we go. Okay, so starting on one of the seams, the one that you just took that knot in, we're going to wrap the yarn over the seam towards the stem, and then right near the stem, we're going to take the needle and shove it through. Okay, see that? So now we're on this seam, so we want to find the opposite seam. So we're going to turn the pumpkin over, and we want the needle to come out on the opposite seam. So we're over here, we want to come out here. So that's pretty close. There we go, right there. That's perfect. Okay, so pull it out. Make sure you don't get any knots in your yarn. And notice I'm holding the yarn in place just so I know which seam it's supposed to go to. Okay, so now what you need to do is kind of squish the pumpkin down just a little bit and pull your yarn, and see how we're shaping it? See how it's kind of squishing down? So next we're going to pull the yarn tight because we don't want it to loosen. All right. Okay, so I'm holding on to the yarn, and I'm going to put the needle in right along where the seam is and where it meets the stem. Push that through. Now this time we're going to go to, so we did this one, we're doing this one, so now I'm going to go over to this side. So I'm going to turn the pumpkin over, and I want it to go to right here, right there. So pushing the needle through. Sometimes it gets a little hard because you're going through a lot of stuffing, and I'm not seeing, yeah, doesn't want to go through at all. Yeah. So what I do is I will push the needle against the table very carefully. I don't know where it's coming out. Oh geez, this is really hard. All right, if that doesn't work, let's try it on the other side. Yeah, see, that worked better. There, that side. So we're on this side instead. Okay, let's pull that through. Make sure it doesn't get wrapped around the stem. Okay, so before I go any further, I'm going to make sure that I'm happy with the way this one is. So I'm going to pull that a little tighter and pull this out. There we go. Pull that around and pull that tight. Okay, now do it again. We're going to wrap around this seam. Put the needle in by the stem. Okay, now we're going to go to this other side that was hard to go through before, and now it's really easy. I don't know why, it just worked out that way. So pull your yarn through, make sure it doesn't get knotted. Okay, pull it a little tight and wrap around again. Okay, so we're done covering the 4 seams. So now we want to go to the in-between. So I'm going to, again, shove the needle through. And we're going to go to over this side here. So let's find, oh, look at that, came out in exactly the right spot. So pull that through. Make sure you don't wrap around your stem, and pull it tight. And then wrap it around. Now we're going to go to the opposite side. So put the needle through, and it's on the opposite side. Pull it out. Pull it tight. Okay. Same thing, just keep repeating this until you've covered it all. Okay, so now we're going to go over to this side here. Nope, too far. Too far. There we go, close enough. And pull it out and pull it tight. Wrap it around, put it in, and we're going to over here. There we go. And pull it through. Pull it tight, wrap it around. Okay, this is the last one because I've got all 8 sections covered. So we're going to go, doesn't matter where you send the needle through this time. So we're going to go through. Pull the yarn tight. Okay, so that's the end. Now we want to make sure everything here looks good. It's all nice and tight. I'm going to pull on the yarn, and I'm going to take a stitch. I'm going to try to take a stitch. Wrap the needle around. Wrap the yarn around the needle. Make a knot. Okay, I'm going to do one more knot like that just to be sure. Wrap the yarn around the needle. Pull it out. And then just shove it through so we can hide the knot. It doesn't matter where you come out. Give that a good tug. Trim off your yarn. Okay, and we are done with that needle. Okay, now you'll notice there are a bunch of wrinkles there. So what we're going to do is we're going to start stretching out the wrinkles in the center and shoving them to the ends. And then while we're doing this, we're going to make sure the yarn is covering any of the seams. So I'm just kind of working the fabric and the stuffing around. There we go. Make sure that seam is covered up. Make sure that seam is covered up. And then just kind of give it a little squish in the middle, and there you go. Pumpkin's all done. Oh, a few more wrinkles. Let's fix that. Okay, there we go. Now it's done. Ta-da! There you go. Pumpkin.